So hello and welcome to Intuitive Connection. I'm your host, intuitive counselor, and spiritual guide, Victoria Shaw. And today you guys are in for a treat. We have a guest, Stephanie James, and I met her through the mindbodyspirit.fm podcast network. I had the opportunity to read her latest book, which I'm now going to cheat to make sure I get it exactly right. Your Big, Fat, Juicy Life and Everything After. And I had a very synchronistic experience when I was reading that book. I think I told you about that, Stephanie, when we were chatting before. We're chatting now, but I'm going to share that with listeners in a little bit. But first, I want to say, Stephanie, hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
So I'm excited to dive into the book. I'm excited to dive into the interesting life that you've had. I'm excited because we have some similarities in that we are both licensed counselors, or what is I don't know what your clinical degree is, but we're both.
I have, yeah. I'm a psychotherapist. I have an LCSW.
Yeah. There you go. So we're both therapy type people in our backgrounds. And I don't know how long you've been doing that part of your work. For me, listeners may or may not know that I got the counseling certifications and licensing and all that after my intuition opened up, because I wanted that skill set. So I've always been doing these two things in parallel, and my doctorate in psychology was research. So that's like a totally different thing. But for you, were you a therapist before you got all spiritual, or were these things always intertwined?
For me, they've been intertwined because I didn't just have that one awakening. I mean, I was one of the rare kiddos, I guess, that knew from a very early age, basically, and it's kind of how the book starts out, as you know, is just like at 5 or 6 years old, being very aware of, oh, yeah, we're never born, we never die, this just continues. And so I do think, though, that being a psychotherapist was a natural fit for me as well. I mean, it interwove beautifully with that spiritual journey. And so it has taken many different forms. I mean, the latest iteration, which is for the last 18 years, just being a psychotherapist and interweaving that with filmmaking and, podcasting like you and writing books. And so it's just, it's been a beautiful journey in that way.
So let's talk about the book. Let's talk about how the book came about. And also for listeners, having a big, fat, juicy life sounds like a good thing. I think so we all want that.
Right. Yeah. And that's what was important to me too in writing this book, because at first, and I'll tell you the story first. So the story of how this book came to fruition was a little over a year ago in March. I was interviewing Neil Donald Walsh for my show. And for listeners that may not know him, he's the guy who wrote the Conversations with God books. And so it was such a joy to have him on the show, yet we couldn't get to the interview. I mean, I'm so thankful, Victoria, like you and I met ahead of time, had our own Zoom call weeks ago and got to know each other. And so that was so great because I had never met him. And so we got on that call and we couldn't get to the interview. Like it took us half an hour to finally drop into interview mode. And I think it's so beautiful. I have all of this recorded. So you see the moment in that conversation, he gets this download and he says, Stephanie, you're going to write your next book and you're going to start tomorrow morning. And his first idea was, he said, the name of this book's going to be I'm Dying to Tell You About Death, and it's going to have a global impact, and I'm going to endorse this book.
Wow.
Well, I did start writing the next morning, and this book came through in a little under 6 weeks, which was just phenomenal. My first 2 books each took 9 months each. It was like gestating a baby, it felt like. And this one, I mean, sometimes I'd get woken up at 4:30 in the morning and just sit at the computer for 3 hours and just allowed it to come through. And then at one point, my literary agent said, with all the rough times right now, publishers aren't wanting to do another book on death. What do you think? And she said, and the book's not about death. It's really about your sacred life. And just, I mean, it was almost like I was joking, Victoria. I mean, but because it just hit me and I'm like, well, then I guess it's going to be Your Big Fat Juicy Life and Everything After. And she was like, oh my gosh, that's it.
Love it.
That was it.
Love it. And it's funny too. So talk a little bit about the premise of the book, because the thing that struck me, and I can't remember the context, but most listeners know that follow the show, that in 2023 both of my parents left their earthly bodies. And I had a complicated childhood. We can leave it at that. More complicated relationship with my female parent than my male parent. And my father passed first. And, from the moment he crossed over, he was with me. And that was a very powerful experience. And he's still with me sometimes. And it's really quite lovely. I enjoy him in some ways much more in spirit form, though, I loved him as a human being too. But, my mom passed about 6 months later, and they had been separated for 30 years. So it was pretty remarkable that they passed it the first time, but at roughly the same time. But I had, Stephanie, such a deep sense with both of their passing, but especially my mom, that this was a clearing for me. Like that this was going to be helpful for me to get to the next stage in my life. Not that I would push either of those loving, beings off of a cliff. Like that was not my intention at all, obviously, but just that it felt like, the timing was very synchronistic for me and my world and my life. And I guess I was having a thought about that again, because, in our human self, we think of death as a bad thing. And so we think about when someone, passes away, if you say, oh, that was beneficial to me, again, we think pushing someone off a cliff as opposed to appreciating like the divine synchronicity in all aspects of life. And no one leaves before they're ready, on their own terms in their own way. But anyway, I must have been grappling with that a little bit. And I opened your book randomly, someone had sent it to me, the PR person or you or whatever. And so I was like, oh, I'm going to just check this out. I randomly opened a page, or it was a digital book, but whatever. I randomly clicked on a page, and you were telling a story about that. It was exactly about a woman who lost her mother. It had been a complicated relationship, and her mother's spirit came back, if I'm remembering this correctly, and said, I left at that time for you.
Yes.
And so I was just like, oh my God. Now, as soon as that moment happened and the full body chills came on, I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to have her on my show. But I want to talk about that, not just my personal story, but just, how did you receive all this from the book? And it just speaks to how you work. And also thank you, because that message came to me at just the right time. It was a great affirmation.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I remember in our first conversation, we definitely had this parallel. You had this difficult relationship with your mother, and I had it with my father. And so, and I want to speak about that in a moment. I think when you said, what's the premise of the book? The book is really about how we can befriend death, especially here in America, that death is the number one fear that people have. And so they live their lives oftentimes clinging and afraid, and they're making decisions based on this finite soul experience. And so the truth, when we can move towards what I understand is the truth, is that death isn't the end. It's just the next chapter in our book of eternity. And so when we make peace with that, that's when we can be present to this moment. And that's when life really does become sacred. That's when we can experience the big, fat, juicy life, because we're not living in that fear. So it's how to move from fear into love. And love is right here in access in the present moment. So to go back to that, one of the bylines through the book is my relationship with my father that started out so golden and beautiful when I was a child. But by 13, everything blew up when he left my mother. And so like you, when my father passed 3 years ago, I hadn't spoken to him at that point in 6 years. I talk about that in my earlier book, Becoming Fierce, in a chapter that's called Detaching with Love, and how we can actually do that when we have these not healthy relationships, even if it's a family member, how to do that, how we can do that, with grace, with dignity for all parties involved, and really have a strong boundary.
Yeah.
And so I hadn't spoken, as I said, to my father. And when I found out that he had had a stroke and was back in the hospital again, not expected to live, that was when the dreams started coming. So right before he died and right afterwards, for 12 nights in a row, I dreamt of him. And some of them were absolutely, it wasn't like they were these big, profound, like, here's the truth of life or anything like that. He would show up in one of the dreams, we're playing cribbage together. He had taught me to play cribbage as a young girl, and that was something that we had shared. And so we're just, there we are, playing cards together, playing cribbage. And what started to happen, though, right after he passed, was definitely things happening in the house. I mean, my ex-husband and I were just like, what is going on? Because all the electronic things in the home started responding. It was like, that's an easy way, I guess, he could show up. But we had a new stove and a new dishwasher that we'd probably only had about 6 months, always worked perfectly. All of a sudden, after dad passes, the time would change on the digital clock.
Wow.
The date would change on the digital clock. Out of the blue, the middle of the day, the dishwasher would turn on. Actually, it's the lamp behind me, which has not flickered since I've been here, but would start just flickering at certain times. And I would say the biggest thing being, when I would get in my car, there was a week where this happened a couple days in a row. I got in my car and my electronic seat was all the way back. Well, of course, the first thing I thought was, oh, to my ex-husband, why was he driving my car? Like, how weird. And I asked him, he's like, I was not in your car. And then it happened twice in one day. And so it's like dad just kind of kept showing up. And I was interviewing Marla Freeze, who is a renowned psychic and medium, right, who has worked in LA with the FBI on cold case murders and has just been instrumental in helping with them. And she has an amazing book called American Psychic. And so I was interviewing her. I'd already interviewed her and we were friends, had been friends for years by this point, but I had interviewed her right about a month after dad had passed. And you can see it on the video on minute 26. She says, oh, your dad's here. And this orb of light doesn't go up and down or diagonal. It does this like wave movement and then moves up. And she just goes, did you see that? And I'm like, yeah, I couldn't miss it.
Wow.
And so at that point, she said, your dad has a lot of work to do, a lot of cleanup, but he wants to come back. And so let's talk the 16th of February. And so, making this long story short, since his passing, our relationship has, improved exponentially because I feel him in his purest form. Right. It's not about personality. It's not about past behavior. He's just really made it clear that he's around, and other people have experienced it, not just me. My right. brother, when he was over, experienced the same things. So yeah, so it's beautiful how we can find that level of healing that we couldn't when they were here in physical form.
Yeah, for sure. I know that I had the experience too, where I just really went into like you said, into appreciation mode with my parents, because I'd done a lot of cleanup around what was not to appreciate about my childhood, right? But there's always like gold, there's always good, because we come from love and we are made of love. And even if we get a little bit confused here on earth and have trouble expressing and holding that container of love, especially for those that we're supposed to love the most, because of our own conditioning, like all of that, there's always going to be some beautifulness in there. And so that was a big thing for me, was to remember all the good stuff and things that I forgot, like you playing cribbage with your dad, or for me, moments, just having these philosophical conversations with my dad when I was a child. I was like, did that really happen? Oh yeah, it did. So I think, yeah, death can give us a beautiful reconnection if we're open to it. And I've also always been told, by my guides, but also by deceased loved ones again and again and again. And I think this can really free things up for people that are grieving, that the grief process is for you, right? When the soul crosses over, they're free. Like the moment my dad crossed, it was very sudden, and as soon as I heard that he was gone, he was there. And he just kept telling me, like, I feel so free. I feel so free. It was like the most beautiful thing to behold, to see how he was doing on the other side. And of course, sometimes there is some work to be done. And, my dad and I was fortunate in that we had some conversations that probably needed to be had right before he passed. So he was able to do some of his work on this side. And that was very beneficial to me. I'm really grateful for that. Not so much with my mom, but that's okay too. We do it our own way. But the grief process, I've always been told, but I want to know what you think about it. It's for the human left behind. The spirit on the other side, sometimes too, I'll see from my clients, you processing this or you doing that is beneficial for them. On the other side, they get a boost. They're doing it with you. They're here. They're waiting for you. But you can't hurt them from this side of the equation, right? Like they're patient. They're there. They're growing with you. But the pain that you feel, you don't have to feel it for them. You don't have to feel the tragedy of their loss. All of those things are very human things. And as they've crossed over, they've mostly made peace with that.
Yes. And that was absolutely has been my experience and my experience in working with clients. And that's one of the important chapters in Your Big Fat Juicy Life is growing through grief. And the importance of us really acknowledging our grief journey, because part of the Big Fat Juicy Life is having the full experience. It's not that, oh, we only live in joy and everything is always perfect. I think our big, fat, juicy life is sometimes we're in the depths of sorrow. Sometimes we're angry or we don't understand, we're confused or we're overwhelmed. And it reminds me of Rumi's poem, The Guest House, where it says this life is a guest house, every day a new visitor, a meanness, a sadness, some malice comes. Greet them at the door laughing and invite them in. We never know which one has been sent as a gift from beyond. Oh, that's a super short hack of that poem, but that's the essential message. And I feel like that's it. And that each one of us has a grief journey when we lose someone. Ironically, just a little over a month ago, I got that call on the Sunday morning that you never want to get because when it's that early that something's wrong. And my favorite uncle had died unexpectedly. And it was one of those things where at first I was just like, no, like I just kind of said that to my mother over and over when she was telling, I was like, no, because we had all just been together. Right. And this is the funny uncle that plays the ukulele for all of us every single Christmas Eve, where we all sing Christmas carols together. And I have a really large family. So at a minimum, there's 22 of us there together singing and laughing. And so, of course, I just had the video from this, and so it was interesting to watch myself in this grief journey again, because I just couldn't stop crying for days and just really took a day off from work and just cried to my girlfriends, cried with other people, cried by myself. And then it was like, I got it really clearly, like, oh yeah, just as you said, I am grieving for me because I love him so much and I'm sad I'm not going to see him next year, or even, this summer, see him this summer. But I really got this very clear vision of him because his wife, my Aunt Evelyn, had died almost a year to the day before he did. It was about 3 days difference. And he was so sad and so grieving her death. And I feel like when he passed, there was really no reason for him to pass. It was like he just had said, in the middle of the night, I feel like I can't breathe. They took him to the hospital. They said his lungs are filling with fluid and his body's shutting down. Wow. And he just left. They said he's not going to make it through the morning. And he didn't. So at 5 a.m., getting this call, but the clarity that I had, and I have the joy of living on 5 acres here in Santa Fe, and I get to walk these gorgeous, just dirt roads with the mountains surrounding me every day. And I'm out on this walk, and I was just very clear. I'm like, oh my gosh, they were life companions. They kayaked in Alaska. They rode their bikes through Europe together. Like I just had this clear vision of them just like kayaking through the clouds, just like just in
Ah,
such joy. And even though there are times that I have cried since then, it brought the biggest sense of joy and peace to me because it was a very, very clear vision of like, he is free and happy and joyful. And of course, not that he would want to leave his children or his family, us, and his spirit was ready. As
yeah.
you said, it chose like, oh, this is a great portal. This is my opportunity to go.
Yeah. 1,000%. And I think, oh my God, you said so much in there because I think when we understand the afterlife, when we understand that it's a thing, when we understand that it's a choice, when we understand that we go and we're ready, and that, it's hard sometimes for the people left behind. By the way, he keeps wanting me to tell you he'll be there at those family reunions.
Oh, I'm sure.
He's
I'm
like,
sure.
did you think I would miss that? He's like, I'll be there, I'll
Oh,
be playing along, and he's very much with his children, who he says are doing very well with the grief process. He's like, they're doing surprisingly well with his loss, which, pleases him.
oh,
Um,
so good.
but I think that, I know for me, it was reincarnation, which was something that I didn't really, it just wasn't on my radar, except for some weird movies from the 70s. But like, it wasn't something I ever thought about. And when I started this journey, first of all, I had like a lot of teachers that started seeing past lives for me. So I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And then I started seeing them for my clients and for myself. And so that changed everything, because once I saw, oh, wow, I've been this person and been in all these bodies, that was to me the entry to this idea that my soul was eternal. And it just took away the fear of death. Now, I needed to spend another about 15 years really working on the fear of life. because that's a thing too, right? Like, we could
Mm-hmm.
talk about that, but the fear of death, beyond that physical, when your body, someone cuts you off at the stop sign and your body goes into overdrive, but that's a different thing. Like, mentally, I know when it's time, it's time, and when I'm ready, I'll be ready. And so I don't live my life anymore according to like trying to cling on to something that isn't mine to keep.
Yes. Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I feel like for me, truly, the moment that I was no longer afraid of death was a story that is in the book. And so I was 25 years old and a single mom with a 4-year-old daughter. And my Aunt Gwen had breast cancer and had been really struggling for 5 years and had gone in this particular morning for exploratory surgery. And I was in the bath and the phone rang, and little Acacia, my daughter, brings the phone in. And I always have to stop and tell people, I think it's so ironic because the name Acacia is the Greek word for immortality. And it's the tree of life in Africa. I never thought when I named her Acacia that she would be the one teaching me about immortality. And so this particular morning, she gives me the phone. This is back in the early 90s. So it's one of those huge portaphones. And I'm in the tub talking with my mother. And she says, they went in for the exploratory surgery and she just had cancer all through her entire body. And so basically, they sewed her back up and said she probably has about 3 months to live. And so I'm in the tub just sobbing. And little Acacia comes back in. And she sits on the side of the tub and she's like, "Why are you crying, Mama?" And I said, "Oh, honey, Mama just doesn't want anyone to die." And she just looks at me with her sweet little wise eyes, and she says, "But Mama, we never die." And then I'm thinking, oh, she's thinking of heaven. Even though we didn't attend church or talk about heaven, I said, "Oh, honey, you mean heaven?" And she just looks at me again and shakes her head. And she's like, "No, Mama, there's no heaven." She said, "When I was in the sky with God, I was a light." And then she pauses and says, "Do you remember your other mother, Dorothy?" And I'm just like, oh my God. My other mother, Dorothy, was my grandmother who died when I was
Ooh.
13. And and my grandfather had remarried the next year. And so the only grandma that she knew was Grandma Seal.
Right.
And again, I didn't have pictures of my grandparents. That was just not something we didn't, of course, talk about Dorothy because it was always Grandma Seal. So she says, your other mother, Dorothy, her light was in the sky with me. And then God put some of her light with my light, and I got to come down and be your daughter.
Wow.
And it still gives me chills to this day because I mean, I called my mother right away. It's my mom's mom is Grandma Dorothy. And I mean, we were just like sobbing and we could just feel of course, I mean, out of the mouths of babes, right? I mean,
Right.
it was so true. And then to continue, what was so interesting to me is all these years later, when Acacia was 12 years old, we were at this big family gathering at Thanksgiving, and we're all sitting around the table. And Acacia's personality was not my grandmother's. I'm much more like my grandmother. She's very outgoing, doesn't know a stranger. If she knew that it was your birthday, Victoria, she could have just met you. She would have brought you a cake. I mean, she would have made it and decorated it. And, that's just who she was. And Acacia, I mean, she's got the most incredible heart in the world, but much more introverted, much more, she's had to grow through a lot of social anxiety in her life. And she's a phenomenal artist, but she has all this rich interior, that she taps into, but not my grandmother's personality. And we're sitting around the table, and all of a sudden my grandpa says, oh, I think Acacia is the most like Dorothy out of all my grandchildren. And he had 26, so it's like, and we all kind of laughed, but it was like, that was the true love of his life. And he could see that spark, that energy within her.
Yeah. You said so much in there. And I think you said something else that's so important. I think we have soul personalities, or soul signature, right? And so some of that is going to be, but also I think it's so important to know that when you come into your human form, you're going to have different experiences. So you're going to have a different personality, a different makeup. I just think that that's so powerful and important that people, almost assume like you're going to be you in all these different bodies, and you're not. You're going to be a piece of who you really are, like your daughter so beautifully and eloquently put, again, out of the mouths of babes. That's just such a beautiful way of explaining it. But the you that you are now is a one-time deal. It's an ever-evolving deal. And my psychologist brain wants to say, if you studies of human personality can't pin that down, it's like it's really hard to even say, because our personalities, even in the human world, are so fluid. But none of that encapsulates who you really are, but it is your point of focus while you're here, and it's going to be unique to you in every incarnation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I love, to expand that thought of the lights that we are. It makes so much sense to me. And as I've thought about it and written about it and pondered it more and more, that that light that is us, that comes straight from source, that is all one, that just as you said, we're just experiencing a piece of that. And so that's why it makes sense to me that you can be having this experience with your father and his spirit, but simultaneously at the same time, there's part of him, part of that light has reincarnated, and part of that light has morphed into something else and transformed into something else. And it's all happening at the same time. And the importance of knowing that light, which is us, it does continue. And I do think, yes, of course, there's an aspect of it, like you said, that comes back in this, reincarnates into, let's say, this form. And that's why we start having these memories. That part of the light remembers. And to me, when I think about source, we're all just trillions of cells of that one source, just like we in our human bodies have trillions of cells that comprise our inner universe.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. I can't believe the time, and I'm so mindful of it, and I'm so bummed because I know, Stephanie, that I could talk to you forever. So hopefully this won't be our last conversation. In fact, I know it won't be, but yeah, no, that's really beautiful. And I'm going to tune in because I'm getting warring questions now as we start to, wind her down. I want to ask you from the book, because there's so many amazing stories in the book. There's so many. I mean, I had my aha moment. You talk about the beautiful story with your daughter. What are some of your favorite stories, or like one of your favorite stories that you share?
Yeah, I would say for me, one of the most powerful stories. I mean, there's so many in there, right? So it's hard to just pick one. I would say the one that's been lately, it just really impacted me because it only happened a couple of years ago, was my experience with the eagle. And it's this story where this eagle was being chased by these crows. And this is going down the highway. I was going down with a friend of mine, Highway 80, which is through Wyoming. And we were really in nowhere land. But this gorgeous golden eagle was just being harassed and harassed by all these crows, these big crows. And all of a sudden it was like, bam, the eagle, it hits the side of an oncoming semi truck and just plummets to the ground. And so, I mean, and immediately we screech on the brakes, and I had a full latte at the time, just flew out of my hand and splattered on the front windshield. I mean, we stopped that quickly and then drove in reverse to be like a windshield at the side of the road for this bird. When we got out of the truck, we could tell the bird was dying. You know, it had one wing bent out to the side, one leg in front of it, and its head was down and blood was coming out of its beak. I know. I mean, and so, you know, we're standing there and I'm so just blown away by the majesty of this bird. And I immediately was like transported to what this bird was doing before this, you know, like its ability to see above all of us, to be in the sky and to be a part of the sky, and what that was like for him, that freedom. And so I just felt I have huge chills just connecting to this bird. And my friend said, well, let's get a hold of the Forestry Service or the Wildlife Refuge. Let's get a hold of someone. And he goes and makes some calls. It was a Sunday, so it was hard to get a hold of anybody, but he finally does. And he says, okay, they're going to be here in about an hour and a half. And he said, I know you've got so many deadlines and so much work ahead. You know, they know where the bird is. You know, we can just leave. And I was just like, I am not leaving this bird. Like, there was no way I was leaving that bird. And what I began doing, I mean, I just started sobbing when he said that because I knew I just needed to be there. And so through my tears, I'm sitting there just sending this bird just peace and love and just, you know, I mean, just praying and praying. It must have been for about half an hour solid. And all of a sudden the bird picks up its head and starts looking around, tucks in its wing, tucks in its leg, but it's just sitting there like it's nesting. You know, my friend said, he's probably internally bleeding. But he was all of a sudden alert. And there was this moment where he and I made eye contact, and it was just like I could feel my heart beating with his, you know, and I'm sending him just like, it's okay, you're safe, you know, we're here for you, I love you, and just continuing to send that. Well, so it did take an hour and a half. The ranger finally got there. And the window of the truck I was sitting in, I was in the truck. We'd been taking turns going out and just being with the bird so that we didn't overwhelm him. And so I was in the truck and the window's down and I can hear them talking beside me. And the ranger says, okay, well, we're going to have to wrap this coat around him so we can capture him. And we'll take him to the raptor rescue. He will be in captivity the rest of his life, but at least he'll be alive. And it was as if the eagle heard their conversation, and instantly he was up on his feet, and then whoosh,
wow,
like this 6 feet of wingspan come out of this bird, and he circles up into the sky, does a circle around the truck, and then takes off for the hills. And we just watched him until he just became a speck of sand in the sky. And I was just like, we have just witnessed a miracle. I mean, I felt like that it was almost like watching this death and then resurrection. and that his soul, as all of our souls, again, that incredible connection with his soul, that in that place, we are all one and we are all free.
Oh, it's beautiful. And can I give you a message from that beautiful raptor bird that tells me, if you want me to tell you what I get,
Yes,
he tells me
yes.
he's very much your spirit animal. He's very much it's so funny because I was gonna tell you another story and I'm getting like tingles around this. So I'm I'm just so excited. I can't find my words. Because it's all kind of coming together, but he wants you to know, like, you had an energetic connection with this bird. I feel like part of you is in that bird, and that bird was in you, kind of deal. Before you guys reconnected, if that makes sense, I feel that you are feeling this. But you had said that the bird was a miracle, or that you witnessed a miracle, and what the bird wants to remind you is you are the miracle. The bird just wanted to give you that message. And I can see that beautiful raptor. He is telling me, it feels like he is telling me he is no longer in a physical form, but that his spirit soars around you all the time in every raptor that you see.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
very
you.
welcome.
That like is bringing tears to my eyes, just.
I can see him. I mean, I'm a bird nerd and I'm a lover of all raptors, and they're, hawk is my spirit animal, but I love my eagles too.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I just feel such a powerful connection. I can see you soaring with that beautiful bird, and he just wants you to remember that you're a piece of him and he's a piece of you.
So beautiful. Thank you.
And the funny thing is, I'm going to share this really quick before we wind down because it's crazy, and I should always trust the random things that come through my head. And I didn't bring it up, but we were talking about a little bit of your daughter's story, a little bit of grandma's light came into me, and I think sometimes it is a amalgamation, because I had this dog, my sweet little dog Oliver. He has since crossed over, but I had always seen myself having 3 children, and after having 2 children, and I love my children so much, I knew that was the right number for me.
Yeah.
Like my ex-husband and I were quite sure 2 was good. And I had one of each, so it felt very resonant. But around that time when I was running out of juice to have that 3rd child, I got my little Oliver doggy, and I always had this sense that part of his energy was my 3rd child, like that, and we always say that about our dogs or like our children, but it just was different. I felt like a little bit of that 3rd child energy was riding in on Oliver, and with Oliver, and he was totally attached to me, totally devoted to me, vice versa. And it helped me, in many, many ways. And then he eventually transitioned to being my ex-husband's dog. And when we separated, the dogs went with Dad. And we had another dog already, and he was very devoted to her. And what I will tell you is that the core bits of his personality stayed very much the same, right? Like his little behaviors and things like that. But there was a piece of his energy that just was not there anymore. Do you know what I mean? And I really felt like, and my kids noticed it too. My son always used to joke, Oliver has attachment issues. He was like attached to you, and now he's attached to Dad. But, he was the same little dude. I loved him, but there was like a little element that was gone. And I think too, I don't know what you think about this, but I wanted to bring it up because I was thinking about it before you brought up your beautiful raptor story. I think sometimes too, we don't always understand how the full extent of how this incarnation process works, right? And that sometimes we do get these bits and pieces of ourselves spread out throughout the universe. So anyway, I wanted to put that out there as our parting words because it just came into my brain.
I love that, and I absolutely believe that. And I would say to you quickly in response that my dog Jules, I was absolutely blown away that I had her for 2 years when I suddenly started calling her Ginger, which was a dog of mine that had passed, like 10 years before that. And it was so bizarre. It only lasted for 2 weeks, But during those 2 weeks, it was like I could feel Ginger. Jules had behaviors like Ginger at that time, where all of a sudden she was coming up and kind of laying on my lap and then putting her hands on me. And I was like, this is so strange. And for the life of me, I could not remember to call her Jules. And then it was gone.
Wow.
And then it didn't happen. And so when you say that, I go, oh my gosh. Yeah, I do think, that light, like you said, it's like it comes and it can flow in and out. And so it's not always in this exact present state, but that's the beauty of it. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. This light is eternal, this beautiful light, this essence that is us, this divine spark. That's what continues in all shapes and forms and continues in these beautiful, like radiant circles, as if a pebble in a pond, and radiates throughout eternity.
It's beautiful. All right. Last question, because I ask everyone this one on the show. How do you experience your intuition?
It comes to me in a couple different ways. One of the ways is it's like, well, I say it's like, it is now I'm understanding more and more my guardian angel, because it's a male's voice. I always thought that was so weird that it would come in a male's voice. I mean, I'm talking my whole life, I would hear this male's voice. And it's the one that guided me to Santa Fe, that said, you need to move to Santa Fe. It had only happened one other time 30 years before, when it was like, you need to move. And only twice in my life has it said to move, but they were monumental, very important, essential moves that if I hadn't have moved, other things would have happened. So I do hear that, but I have a lot of, I would say that I'm a seer is how I would describe it. A lot of times my intuition comes to me in dreams, in pictures, in a meditation. When I had meditated for 3 months, 7 years ago, using a specific holding meditation, at the end of 3 months, one night, right as I opened my eyes, it dropped in and said, you're going to make a film. And that's my When Sparks Ignite film. And at the time I had 67 cents in my savings account, so I was like, okay. And it was one of the most phenomenal experiences with an award-winning film crew and some of the most incredible luminaries of our time coming together and really making this miracle happen. So that's how it comes in for me.
I love that. It's beautiful. All right. And before we share about the film and the book and all of that, well, actually, let's do that now. So people are now going to want to find you after this amazing conversation. You're going to want to read the book, guys. I loved the book. I really, 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 truly did. And there's so mmany powerful stories in there, and it's so beautifully written. And it was beautifully written in 2 weeks. So you want to experience that.
6 weeks. 6 weeks.
6 weeks. 6 weeks. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
We have another recurring guest on the show, Mark Gober, who's like very prolific writer, and all of his books, he literally like writes them all in 2 weeks. So
holy cow.
I know, but 6 weeks is still astounding. So anyway, how do people find you? The movie, the books, the working with you, all that stuff. Please share what that looks like and how to do it.
Yeah, because one of the things I love doing besides being a psychotherapist is I'm a transformation guide. And so I've moved away from the word coach, because I feel like, I guide people to their own inner magnificence, to their own inner divinity. So it feels more like a guide, because it's this co-venture. But people can find everything about me on StephanieJames.world. So StephanieJames.world is my website, and there's a trailer for the film. There's my books. There's my retreats. You can find out all kinds of things about me. And then if you go to Amazon, my new book is on Amazon. And it's so fun, because not only is it my own story, it's the people that showed up to be in this book in the 6 weeks. Wayne Dyer's daughter, Sage, and his wife, Marceline, Stephen Simon, who's the award-winning filmmaker, the Academy Award-winning filmmaker of What Dreams May Come, Ariel Ford, Suzanne Giesman, all of these people who just, were like, yes, I have a story to include in this book as well. And so it was just a beautiful alchemy that came together that created that book.
I love that. I'm excited for everyone to check that out, and we'll have all that information in the show notes. And Stephanie, any parting words before we wrap this one up?
I think the important thing to me is to really say to your listeners, we're all in this together. We truly are. Each one of us are these essential golden threads in the tapestry of humanity. So as I say, on my film poster, there's 3 words under the title, and it's your period healing period matters period. Each one of us are those essential lights. And so to keep clearing our conduit so that we can bring more love, more light, more healing to the world through us as us.
I love that. Beautiful place to end. And listeners, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you loved this one as much as I did. I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for letting me get to do what I love to do. And love you all, and namaste.